This man here, he's Julius Richard, and he lived 1852, 1921, and his surname is Petrie, the inventor of the Petri dish, the humble little Petri dish. And he invented it around about 1881, and it was believed, actually, there were a few other people who invented it, and it was believed that his superior Koch at the Berlin University in the 1880s was the actual inventor of the humble Petri dish. And but anyway, as history turns out, he's got the credit for it, and everyone knows the Petri dish oh so well. And it wasn't too long after that they discovered that when they put agar jelly in it, that they found that the bacteria flourished in the Petri dish, and they were able to analyse it. And of course, that's how they discovered penicillin around about 1925. And so the Petri dish has been the hallmark of most of these laboratories, and you'll know that that is a laboratory level 4 security. And some of these viruses and bacteria are incredibly dangerous. And there was an Australian lady who lost her life in 1943 from just a prick in the finger. And that's the kind of stuff that you got to wear in these laboratories when dealing with them. And some of the world's most dangerous viruses, this one's the humble Ebola virus. And there have been a number of outbreaks over the years, particularly in Central Africa. And it has a death rate of around about 70 to 80%, 90% if you get some variants, which is pretty high, isn't it? And, you know, it's pretty sad in Central Africa when you had the health workers who were coming around and they were, the rumour that went around was that this was caused by and spread by health workers. So that doctors couldn't treat it anyway. That was the humble Ebola virus. There are more deadly ones apparently, the Hunter virus, which has a 100% success rate, but that hasn't caused nearly as many deaths as Ebola. Ebola has the name of being one of the most fearful. But this one here, this is the AIDS virus. You'll know this one. You don't hear much about AIDS now, do you? I haven't heard hardly anything about AIDS. In the 1980s, it was front page on, all the time about AIDS. But it's still deadly. In our part of the world, they're able to extend the life. Only in a few people has it actually been cured. In Africa, it is estimated that it's about 1 in 25 people who have AIDS. Incredible, isn't it? 1 in 25. And so it's caused millions of deaths over the years. What do I talk about the Petri dish? You know, when you have a little Petri dish, you have little bacteria and little microbes that look pretty innocent. You remember doing this in third form, first year of high school, and you had these Petri dishes and you put your little stuff in, and then you watch the mould grow. Now we just do it with bread and pikelets and that sort of thing. But you see the microbes grow from something that looked pretty good. And then it grows into something that causes death. You know, like the Ebola, Hunter virus, many other viruses, bacteria. One lab worker caught the plague inside a laboratory. And and he died from it as well. These viruses are incredibly dangerous, and in a petri dish, these viruses, they can grow, and we saw the level of security that prevents people from catching them, and of course we know that they have escaped from laboratories. You can read them all on the internet of all the times that the viruses escaped from laboratories. Coronavirus wasn't mentioned, don't know why. Anyway, there is a problem with the petri dish of life that we have, and there's something deadly that grows that we don't perceive. It is odorless, it is imperceptible. You know when you steal. You know when you, well, I'm not saying anyone has. A person knows when they have committed adultery, do they not? You don't wake up in the morning and say, oops, that was an accident, do you? These things are intentional. Pride is not as easily perceptible. We don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be more proud. It is odorless. It is imperceptible. And we don't realise how deadly pride is. And we need to make sure that we understand how it works in our lives. Sandra Bland was a lady, and at the time she was about 28, 29, and she was pulled over by the police on July 10, 2015 for the incredibly dangerous manoeuvre of changing lanes without indicating. So the police pulled her over and was preparing to give her a warning, and anyway, things descended into an argument, and she was threatened with a taser. She was carried off, handcuffed, put on the ground, knee in the back, taken off to prison. 3 days later, she took her life. What happened? What happened? She was just going off to work that morning. The state trooper from Texas was just doing his job, seen this car doing a lane change without indicating. Pretty innocuous, I would have thought. Anyway, pulled her over, and she was fairly touchy when being pulled over. I read the transcript of how it evolved, and he said to her, "You were irritated." She goes, "Yeah, I am irritated." And he couldn't understand why she would be. His name was, the state trooper engineer was a Spanish state trooper, and she felt that she was being picked on. She was a civil rights activist. And he said, "Okay, I'll just write you out a warning." Goes back to the car, writes out the warning, comes to the car. She's smoking a cigarette. And he says to her, "Put out the cigarette, please." My first thought was, why would you be asking that? And her reply was, I'm allowed to smoke in my car? Put it out. And it escalated from there. The reason, apparently, is that a cigarette can be used as a weapon. Extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. Well, at the end of a cigarette, it is about 1,000 degrees at the end of a cigarette. I know this. I got one caught here, right here, and my first reaction was to go like that, and I got the full, it's very hot. But anyway, it all just escalated from that. And so she dug her heels in, he dug his heels in, he said to her, get out of the car. He said, no, I'm not. You get out of the car, you're under arrest. Told her 3 times. I can't do the actions or the... He yelled at her and threatened her with the taser. She got out of the car, taken over, handcuffed, put down on the ground. Other people took her away, photographed, in prison. 3 days later, she takes her life. Case studies been done as to how this has escalated out of control. He perjured himself in a trial and he was dismissed from the police force in 2017. A tragic case here of where 2 people, you can put blame on one or the other, but you can put it on both. The police officer dug his heels in. He escalated it when he said, put out the cigarette. She can accept some of the blame too. Anyway, it is what it is, and it's happened what's happened. But you one common denominator here, in that petri dish of life, pride was allowed to fester, and it exploded that day. And I think this is just a tragic and extremely sad case. This lady, in the prime of her life, took her own life in prison over something like this. And pride in heaven, just have a quick look at Isaiah. We'll have a look at Ezekiel 28 rather, and we'll just have a quick look at this one here. Let's have a look at, and this is a passage that we know very well, Ezekiel chapter 28. And verse 14. You were an anointed guardian cherub, and I placed you, and you were on the holy mountain of God in the midst of the stones you walked. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till unrighteousness was found in you. Skipping down to verse 17. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor, and I cast you to the ground. And here we look at the story that we know so well of how sin had emerged in heaven by the covering cherub, the most powerful angel in heaven, who became proud of his own beauty. So each morning, he will look at a full-length mirror. He will look at himself and say, hey, how great I am. And he wasn't satisfied at being the covering cherub. He wanted more. And so then war broke out in heaven and the great controversy, the overarching theme of Adventism, which now comes to earth that we live amongst today. Pride that emerged in heaven, it finds its way as an odorless thing that works through our lives, each one of us. And guess what? We can see it all over, can't we? He or she is so proud. Look at them. Except for, understand what I mean? Certainly, I'm proud of my humility. All right. So anyway, let's come over to Esther, and we'll have a look at the story in Esther of one of the most intense and protracted story of how pride has worked itself out. You remember that we looked at we looked at Esther 3 weeks back. You remember in Esther that this was a strange book because there was something missing from Esther. The name of God, for one thing, which was odd. Elohim, Yahweh were not mentioned. There were no visions, there were no apocalyptic visions, dreams, or anything like that. And even more strangely, prayer is not mentioned. So it appears to be a book that is where God is missing from the book. But yet, we discovered last time the paradox was that though God in the Old Testament intervened in dramatic ways through 10 plagues, parting of the Red Sea, the Jordan, all those sorts of things, slaying of 180,000 Assyrians. But here God, the all-powerful God, works through circumstances and coincidences like he does through our lives today. It's not often we experience the road to Damascus, or people experience the road to Damascus conversion, if you know what I'm saying, or see the parting of the Red Sea. So it's not the regular practice that God does. And so Esther has an important message that the all-powerful God, his will be worked out despite other plans that Haman had. Now, we'll pick up the story in 2:19. Esther 2, verse 19. Stuart, I'm going to ask you to read this in a nice loud voice for us, please. 2 verse 19, please.
When virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate.
Oh, 2 verse, and also go down to verse 23.
Now Esther had not revealed the family and the people, just as Mordecai had charged her. So Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai when she was brought up by him. In those days, when Mordecai sat within the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, storekeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed. And both were hanged on the gallows, and was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.
All right, so, okay. The king's plot was found out by Mordecai. All right, and it was written down where? In the book of Chronicles. All right, so that's what the Persians did. They write everything down of all what's happened in the encyclopedia of Chronicles. Now, what you would expect as a first-time reader, that Mordecai would be rewarded. Let's see what happened to that reward. Verse 1, chapter 3. After those After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. Oh, that's fair. Sorry, Ian, what did you say? Who should have been promoted? Mordecai. Oh, what happened here? Oops, something went wrong here. Ah, right, okay, well, let's read down, So, the king forgot. Now, that was the other curious thing. We're not actually given any insights into motives and thoughts of people. It just tells events. So, Stuart, if you can read from 2 down to 6 for us, please.
All the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman. And so the king had command concerning him, but Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. And the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman to see whether Mordecai's word would stand. And Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of the Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai.
All right, okay, so Haman was from where? He was Haman the Agagite. Mordecai refused to bow. Why? Was this a religious thing? No. Because in that culture, it was a standard thing that you would acknowledge someone who was of higher status. It was just part of the culture of what people did. They would bow, but he refuses to bow to Haman. Esther does not, the book of Esther does not tell us why, but there's a hint. Haman the Agagite. All right? And we find back in 1 Samuel that Saul preserved the king Agar. He preserved him. And all the best cattle, who was an Agite. And so Haman was believed to be a direct descendant. And so now you start to see there's a hint of tension between the Jews and the court. All right, so tension's heating up here, and Mordecai would not bow because it's suggested of his heritage. And so, anyway, what was Haman's reaction to this? Filled with wrath. A little bit more than brassed off. A little bit more than annoyed, but he's filled with wrath. And this wrath burns. And he was promoted to what status? Essentially to Prime Minister. And the king had to command everyone to bow. Well, you don't have to command in a culture where it was acknowledged that's what you do naturally. That's just part of the world you live in. You don't command. So this character, Haman, was probably an obnoxious person, if you like. Okay, so, all right, so what happens next? Verse 7. Thanks, Stuart.
In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell in the 12th month, which was the month of Adar.
And then verse 8, please.
Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples. They do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them reign.
All right, thanks for that. All right, so what did Haman do? He casted what? Purr. Not the purr of a cat. These were clay cubes with cuneiform on them, or dots, which we know today as dice. Here he is. No. Was this gambling? No. This was the way that God's communicated, was throwing the dice. Throw the dice, and he had to wait before he could kill all the Jews for about 11 months, which happened to be, what month was it? The what, sorry? Adar, yeah, which happened to be, and then the command goes out in later verses, on the eve of Passover. Well, that's incredibly ironic, isn't it? They never celebrated Passover in Persia. Would God bless his people who are not celebrating Passover, who didn't go back to Jerusalem? So, what's going to happen here? Haman here, whose fury at Mordecai not bowing to him, now escalates this to the king. So we go back to verse 8. Then Haman said to the king, there are certain people who scattered abroad, dispersed in the province of your kingdom, and their what is different? Their what? Laws are different. He's talking about, never said who, to the king. All right, and he's talking about the Jews. He wants to destroy them because of Mordecai won't bow, and he wants to destroy it because he appeals to the king. Let's just go to the next verse, Stuart, please.
If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 tons of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries.
Now, Herodotus records the total GDP, or the total income of Persia, was 14,950 talents per annum. Inflation adjusted, of course. All right, 10,000 talents. King short of money because he had a disastrous campaign with the Greeks. Destroy people, plunder. Yeah, good idea. Here's my signet ring. Didn't ask who it was. We got some money coming in. How is it that Mordecai, who does not bow to him, this escalates into genocide of the Jews? How does this escalate to the point where he wants to wipe out all the Jews? Pride. In that little petri dish, pride is allowed to grow. And here is Mordecai, who would not bow to him, and that made him so angry. This is how angry it made him. Go to chapter 5. Stuart, verse 13 for us, please. 5 verse 13.
Yet all this avails me nothing so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate.
Just read that again. That sounds really odd, doesn't it? All this is worth nothing. Hold on, what position does he have? PM. All this is worth nothing. Wow. So being Prime Minister and 99.9999% of people bow to you, which helps the old ego, but one doesn't, and all this is worth nothing. You need the approval of Mordecai. You need him to bow you in order to define your self-worth. This is nuts. Blind with fury. Do you think he can see that? We'll see that he didn't. This is what pride does. And at this point, I'm just going to say, unless we understand how pride works in our life, we can easily lose it. We can see it in everyone else. Remember, it's odorless. Remember, it's odorless. Very difficult to see. But you have a look and when you have an argument next time on how it works out. Who loves to win an argument? Let's not go there. Right. Okay, so anyway, so that's what happens now. So in chapter 6, let's find out the rest of the story. This is fascinating, isn't it, if you were a first-time reader? All right. Yeah, Stuart, you got a nice loud voice again, please, from verse 1.
That night the king could not sleep, so one was commanded to bring the book of the records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. It was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and the rest, two of the king's eunuchs, the doorkeepers who sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. Then the king said, "What honour or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" And the king's servants who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." So the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace, suggested the king hang Mordecai on the gallows that he prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in."
Stop there. All right. So, you remember in 2 verse 23, and it was all written in the book of Chronicles, and who was promoted instead of Mordecai? Haman. All right, so the king forgot. And this is where the all-powerful God, the paradox of an all-powerful God works behind the scenes. The king was disturbed and remembers, let's get the encyclopedia of Chronicles out and let's read them. Goes down. People will say, maybe this is a coincidence. Not so. Not so in the book of Esther. This is not a coincidence. And so he reads it and goes, how can we reward him? What can we do? So Haman walks in and asks Haman the question. So keep going.
So Haman came in and the king asked him, "What shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honour?" Now Haman had thought in his heart, "Whom would the king delight to honour more than me?" And Haman answered the king, "For the man whom the Lord king delights to honour, let a royal robe be brought which the king has worn, and a horse on which the king has ridden, which has a royal crest placed on his head, and let this robe and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that he may array the man whom the king delights to honour. Then parade him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim him before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honour." Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse as you have suggested, and do so to Mordecai of the Jew, which sits within the king's gate. Leave nothing undone of all that you have spoken."
All right. Now, can you just picture this in your mind? You know, as he sort of walks in, what can we do for a man whom the king delights to honour? And Haman thinking, licking his lips, go, who does the king delight to honour other than me? And he comes up with this grandiose story of, what would I like? Let's put him on a robe, march him around on a horse, and get a servant. I just love that. You could imagine him just licking his lips at the prospect of him wearing the king's robes, being marched around before all the city to receive Adoration to me, 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 me. Can't you imagine it? And it's just stunning, isn't it, to see what happens. Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse as you have said, and do so to Mordecai, the Jew who sits on the king's gate. Leave nothing out that you have mentioned. This is the most stunning reversal of fortunes. Can you see the look on his face? Wouldn't you love to see it? You see, the reason he came up with putting on a horse, the image of a conqueror, kingly, being put on a robe, is not to take the place of a king. There's a couple of 2 or 3 stories in the Old Testament where the robes are placed on, meaning that the king bestows honour, love and approval to you. I love and I delight in you, and I as a king approve you. Jonathan to David, I give you the robes. I love you, I approve of you. Joseph receiving the robes from the king, similar sort of thing. Maybe not so much of the lovey thing from Pharaoh, but you know, you get the idea. And so the robes are put on him, and he is seeking so much from the king, that approval and delight from the king, that he can be marched around and get the approval of all the people. It's all about him and his own ego. Do you see that in the covering cherub? Have a look at Ezekiel 14. And we've seen this being worked out today. Everyday life. Most stunning reversal of fortune, and he knew at that time he was doomed. He was doomed. Because he had put out the decree against not only Mordecai, but also the Jews. And pride here for him had worked its way through, and until he ended up losing his life on the gallows that he had set up for Mordecai. They were put on him, and the king's servants took delight in the suggestion of what we should do with Haman. Put him on those gallows. They hated him. He was obnoxious, full of himself. The petri dish of pride had worked itself through, and he had violated the basic principle of the universal principle, or the principle of the universe. You lose your life in order to gain it. If you want to save your life, you will lose it. Come with me quickly to John 17. John 17, and Stuart's going to read for you verses 20 to 26. This is the setting of it just before you start. This is the transfiguration. This is Jesus talking to the Father, and I want you to listen to the words about glory. Thanks.
I do not pray for these alone, but also for those who will believe in me through their words, that they may all be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. And the glory which you gave me I have given them, that they may be one, just as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one, that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them as you have loved me. Father, I desire that they also, whom you gave me, may be with me where I am, that they may behold my glory, which you have given me, for you loved me before the foundation of the world. O righteous Father, the world has not known you, but I have known you, and these have known that you sent me. And I have declared to them your name, and will declare it, that the love with which you love me may be in them, and I in them.
All right, so you notice that the glory that Jesus had before the foundation of the world, he lays that aside to come to this earth. He lays aside his kingly robes to come. Why? To redeem us. To redeem us, he had to lay his glory aside, and he asked for his glory to be given to them. The glory which I had before the foundation of the world, give it to them, talking about the disciples. What self-renunciation is that? The antidote to pride is service and servanthood. That is the antidote to it. Jesus came as a servant. Let's go to Matthew 10:38 and verse 39. Thanks, Stuart.
And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it.
And that's the universal principle. It's found there in the last part of that verse about losing your life. Just read that last part again, please.
He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it.
Something Haman never discovered. Let me read this to you in the Message. And I love the way that Peterson phrases it here. If you don't go all the way with me through thick and thin, you don't deserve me. If your first concern is to look after yourself, you'll never find yourself. But if you forget about yourself and look to me, you'll find both yourself and me. And God works through behind the scenes. The king has a dream and forgets, he's rattled, he forgets something. God works behind and his will is done. Haman, thinking that the king is wanting to honour him, wanting to discover approval in his own life, ends up losing it. Stunning reversal of fortunes, isn't it? But yet, through all the machinations behind the scenes, Esther, who in chapter 2 we discovered 3 weeks ago, was essentially a concubine for the Persian culture. She was a blank page that the Persian culture were allowed to write on it, the makeup, doing whatever Haggai had said, getting favour with him, and then sleeping with the king, marrying a heathen person, etc., etc. But yet, through the machinations, God works through her. Then the book of Esther acknowledges her in chapter 4 as Queen Esther. She is acknowledged as queen, given that status. And because there she says, if I perish, I perish. And here, what I want you to grasp here, through the self-renunciation that God gives us, he crowns us with glory and honour, made possible through self-renunciation, the giving of his life, the paying of the penalty through grace, and the clothing us with robe of righteousness. But yet on these tapestries, they take an awful long time to stitch, don't they? One stitch at a time. You ever looked at the back of a tapestry? That was Esther's life in chapter 2. Look what God does through the machinations of Esther. No miracles are recorded, but God is working, and working in Esther's life, that she is able to say, if I perish, I perish. And so she gets her crown as Queen Esther. In our lives, in our day-to-day lives, we, in the petri dish, can easily allow pride to fester. We see it all the time with arguments and disputes in the church. And it's very hard for us to lay pride aside. Ask God to help us to reveal how pride has been worked through the tapestry of our life. For Esther, it looked a mess on the other side, but watch what God will do, because he'll make a tapestry into that and give us the crown. Good news, isn't it? Wonderful.